Welcome to the Daniel Natal Show, the closest thing the internet comes to a blind date. Think of this as one of those awful speed dating things, and you just got stuck with somebody discussing politics. The New American Magazine has been following the deplatforming of conservatives and other dissident voices for a while. We've even been subjected to it ourselves, as you can ask our own Alex Newman. This week, conservative commentator Steven Crowder announced that he was banned from YouTube. As this assault against the freedom of speech ramps up, it provokes an obvious question. Where's the Department of Justice to protect law-abiding Americans? According to Thomas Jefferson, the chief purpose of government is to protect the rights of its citizens. Is it doing that? The Bill of Rights explicitly recognizes both freedom of speech and freedom of the press. At the time, there was no giant corporate media apparatus. That didn't exist. When it mentioned journalists, it was referring to people exactly like Alex Jones, Steven Crowder, or Alex Newman. After all, what was a journalist at the time? It was a normal person who wrote down their impressions in a journal, like Samuel Pepys in the 1600s who kept a diary writing about the fire of London. That's what journalism was. A journalist was not a government propagandist, because when our Constitution was written, there was no Soviet-style government ministry of truth. Likewise, there were no corporations using media outlets as the de facto public relations branches of companies. None of that existed. So when the Founding Fathers said journalist, it was tantamount to the citizen journalists today who were being censored and blacklisted. Journalists did not uphold power. They had an adversarial relationship to it, which is why they needed protecting. So since we have a Bill of Rights, and since those rights were enacted to defend those very people, where's the Department of Justice to defend them? It's kind of their job. What kind of government is it if it is not defending the rights of its people? When Ben Franklin was leaving Independence Hall after the founding of the country, a woman asked him what kind of government Americans had been given. Franklin answered, "A republic, if we can keep it." He knew that republics were extremely hard to maintain historically. Classically trained, he was well aware of what Aristotle and Cicero said, that governments, like any other system, are subject to entropy. They decay and fall apart. John Locke in the 1600s gives us an unfortunate insight into this process. At the end of his 2 treatises on civil government, he has a final chapter on the dissolution of governments. I would encourage anyone hearing the sound of my voice to go out and find that and read it. Locke says that when a government fails, you see certain signs. The government that once existed for the posterity of its people will no longer seek to carry their memory forward. Once a tool to help the people, it's now weaponized against them. The laws will stop being enforced, he writes. He adds that the legislature will be ignored in elections with the rules suspended to allow for vote fraud. He writes, "There also the legislature is altered. For if other than those whom the society hath authorized thereunto do choose, or in another way than what the society hath prescribed, those chosen are not the legislature appointed by the people." He says that in this new corrupt legislature, the assembly where people obtain power by not following the prescribed election rules, the fake representatives will not be interested in defending the rights of the citizens, saying, "Where there is no longer the administration of justice for the securing of men's rights, nor any remaining power within the community to direct force, or provide for the necessities of the public, there certainly is no government left. Where the laws cannot be executed, it is all one, as if there were no laws. And a government without laws is, I suppose, a mystery in politics, unconceivable to human capacity, and inconsistent with human society." So basically, Locke makes the point that Thomas Jefferson made. A government is there to protect the rights of its citizens, and when it stops doing this, its usefulness to society ends. So I ask again, where is the Department of Justice in protecting the rights of people being censored now? The propagandist will assert himself to say, hey, the First Amendment only keeps the government from censoring you, not corporations. In point of fact, it says no such thing. Our Constitution is the community guidelines for our society. Anything operating within that society has to abide by those rules, including corporations. The Bill of Rights makes the promise that if any citizen is having his rights abrogated, the government will assert itself to defend those rights. Is it? If not, why not? We are undergoing massive censorship by people not following our social contract. And this brings us to our second story. Town Hall has an article by Rob Jenkins entitled "Losing the Language, Losing the Argument." In it, he writes, "There's an old saying in debate that those who define the terms usually win the argument. That truism has been playing out on the political stage now for at least half a century, as the right consistently concedes the language to the left. If it seems like we're always losing the argument, perhaps that's because we're always playing on their home field." The left's control of the language kind of reminds me of a book I'm reading now, David Hume's A Treatise on Human Nature. In it, the 18th century philosopher makes a point bearing on this discussion. In a digression, it might be good to point out that he says that the impression precedes the idea. For instance, you don't have an idea of what an apple is until you actually see an apple. Once this happens, your mind creates a duplicate of the image and stores it in your memory. Without a sense impression of something, you're not yet aware of it. He writes, "Neither the lively nor faint ideas can make their appearance in the mind unless their correspondent impressions have gone before to prepare the way for them." This kind of anticipates what's now known as the Baader-Meinhof effect. That's basically the idea that people can't see something until it enters their sphere of consciousness. We've all been there. You buy a particular wristwatch. Only after buying it, however, do you notice all the other people who bought the same watch. Same thing with a particular type of car. Your wife buys a yellow Ford, and only after it comes into your field of consciousness do you start to see it everywhere. Well, according to Hume, everything is like this. You're only aware of something once you have a sense impression of it. Until then, it can be all around you, but you won't notice it. He says that language works on this same principle. Language gives us a collection of not just sounds, but archetypes and ideas. Each word in language embodies a whole complex of associations, which is why all the languages around the world operate more or less the same. By giving us the word for something, we're inheriting the whole cultural idea of the thing, and now it's within our sphere of consciousness. Our world is expanded. He writes, "Were ideas entirely loose and unconnected, chance alone would join them. And it is impossible the same simple idea should fall regularly into complex ones, as they commonly do, without some bond of union among them, some associating quality, by which one idea naturally introduces another. This uniting principle among ideas is not to be considered as an inseparable connection, for that has been already excluded from the imagination. Nor yet are we to conclude that without it the mind cannot join two ideas, for nothing is more free than that faculty. But we are only to regard it as a gentle force, which commonly prevails, and is the cause why, among other things, languages so nearly correspond to each other." Without having the word for something, especially for an abstract idea like, say, freedom, it won't be within your sphere of consciousness. In the novel 1984, George Orwell describes social control by the society's rulers, whereby they annually alter the dictionary. People use fewer and fewer words. By this method, their world is shrunk down. One of the characters gushes, "Isn't it great? If people don't know the word freedom, how can they even be aware it exists? How can they even ask for it?" The political left operates according to this methodology. By manipulating the language, they can manipulate the population. It allows them to control the list of archetypes, whereby they control whether you see them or not. Up until now, the political right has been too willing to go along with the left and allow them to rewrite the dictionary. Indian? No, say Native American. Mrs.? No, say Ms. European culture? No, say white supremacy. One of my favorites is how the left redefined gender, prying it away from biological sex. Most young conservatives have been raised with the new formulation, and they just passively go along with it. They probably wouldn't if they understood the faulty logic behind this semantic tomfoolery. The English language has parallel vocabularies, from the time when William the Conqueror conquered England in 1066. The invading Normans spoke French, and the conquered Saxons spoke a Germanic language. After the takeover, French, and Latin more broadly speaking, was promoted as the classy language, and the language of the Anglo-Saxons was seen as uncouth, vulgar. Most of the so-called dirty words in English are just the Anglo-Saxon way to say it. It's why writer Ernest Hemingway joked, calling bad words Anglo-Saxonisms. At any rate, because of this dual linguistic heritage, English has two parallel vocabularies, one from Latin and one from German. For instance, we have rear and raise. We have height and altitude. We have kingly and regal, pig and pork, cow and beef, bird and fowl. None other than Karl Marx wrote in Das Kapital. In English writers of the 17th century, we frequently find worth in the sense of value and use, and value in the sense of exchange value. This is quite in accordance with the spirit of a language that likes to use a Teutonic word for the actual thing, and a Romance word for its reflection. Long story short, we have gender and sex in the English language for the same reason. They're synonyms. They were always synonyms, just as agua and water both mean H2O. Only within the last 15 minutes did the political left lie and start telling kids that gender was something completely different, a social construct. Sadly, gender is just about the worst word you could pick to decouple from biology, given the fact that gender comes from to generate, as in to generate a child. It's the same root for genesis and genitals. Gender is just about as much of a social construct as your genitals are. Yet young people, emerging from what passes for our educational system, absorb the newly minted propaganda of the left and just acquiesce to the language modifications. They don't even question it. So long as conservatives cede this ground to the left, they will lose every argument. The point is, stop using their language. Stop allowing them to correct you. They're not correcting you. They're miscorrecting you. Kind of like when you use male pronouns for a biological male and they accuse you of misgendering someone. No, they're misgendering. Stop letting them gaslight you. It's mentally abusive, and worse, it allows them to put you in a mind cage that is even worse than cancel culture. This goes beyond mere censorship. This is eroding the sense impressions in your mind, as Hume alludes to, shrinking your world down to one tiny manageable prison cell, to which the left has the key. Could reading the New American Magazine boost your heart health, support your immune system, and help you lose 20 pounds of unsightly fat? The answer is no. But you should read it anyway. It'll keep you informed and provide information that cuts through the noise of lesser news outlets. TheNewAmerican.com. And don't forget to subscribe to us on social media and hit that like button.